Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Who pays? Who pays for this latest $50 billion orgy of spending by this costly Prime Minister? We know who won't pay. It won't be those with trust funds that protect their millions of inheritance like the Prime Minister, nor the billionaires that invite him to their private Caribbean islands. They'll hide their money. You know who will pay? You will pay. You, the welder or waitress who can't pay your mortgage because he's inflated the mortgage rates. You will pay because he carbon taxed your food and now you can't feed your kids. Why should you pay for him?
My comment still applies. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it is interesting to see the lengths to which the Leader of the Opposition will go to avoid saying that he is choosing to stand with the ultra-wealthy, against the middle class, against young Canadians. When we first got elected and raised taxes on the wealthiest 1% to lower them for the middle class, the Conservative Party and that leader voted against it. We're asking for the wealthiest in this country, the wealthiest 0.1%, to pay more in taxes so we can support the middle class, so we can restore the dream, particularly for young people, of home ownership, of a brighter future that the world is taking away from people all over the world.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister likes to blame the world for the problems that he caused. He doubled the debt, doubled the rent, doubled mortgage payments, doubled the needed down payment, and now he's doubling down on the same costly mistakes that have made life unaffordable for Canadians. When will this Prime Minister realize that he's not worth the cost and that repeating the same thing 9 times and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, what the Leader of the Opposition is saying is that he stands with the ultra-wealthy 0.1% in this country, and everyone else is on their own, because that's what he would do as he slashes programs, as he slashes investments, as he doesn't build the homes necessary, as he doesn't have a plan to fight climate change and create good jobs, as he has stood against affordability measures, as he stands against seniors getting dental care, Mr. Speaker. He is choosing to stand with the ultra-wealthy while we are investing in Canadians and building a stronger future that is fair for everyone.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, he is the ultra-wealthy. He hid his family fortune in a tax-sheltered trust fund so he wouldn't have to pay the same tax as everyone else. He vacations with the ultra-wealthy on their private islands in tax-preferred locations where they can hide their money and avoid paying their fair share here in Canada. And now he's paying off the ultra-wealthy by spending $54 billion on debt interest, more than on health care. Why give more money to the ultra-wealthy bankers and bondholders instead of the nurses and doctors?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, this is a budget that invests in fairness for every generation by asking the ultra-wealthy to pay a little more. And, Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party is choosing to stand with the status quo, stand with the ultra-wealthy, instead of saying, yes, we need to invest in young people. We need to build more houses. We need to support seniors with dental care. We need to create more spaces in childcare. We need to deliver hundreds of dollars a month tax-free in a disability benefit. These are the things we will be doing. Those are the things that they stand against.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I want you to know that the status quo is unacceptable, that Canada has become an unfair country where young people, an entire generation, cannot afford a home and families cannot afford food. And if he finds out who's been running this place for the last 9 years, there will be hell to pay. Will the Prime Minister complete his investigation and tell us who's been in charge for the last decade?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
When we first got elected, we raised taxes on the wealthy.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, when we got elected, first thing we did was raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% and lower them for the middle class, a measure that the Conservative Party voted against. We've continued to invest in young people, invest in standing up a national housing strategy after the previous government had completely ignored housing, and the former housing minister, who is now leader of the opposition, was responsible for creating exactly 6 affordable homes in his time as minister. We've continued to invest, and we're going to continue to make sure that the economy is fair for every generation, and that means asking the wealthiest to pay a little more so we can put more money in the pockets of the middle class.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has got to stop getting his facts from his incompetent housing minister's Twitter account. Yes. This is the same guy who, as immigration minister, lost track of 1 million people. When I was housing minister, we built 92,782 new apartment units with an average rent of $973. How many apartments will the Prime Minister build at the price of $972 a month this year?
Here. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, our housing plan is the most ambitious and comprehensive in Canada's history, and will unlock close to 4 million homes by 2031. This happens because we're working with municipalities, we're working with provinces to increase the levels of ambition. We've put out the most comprehensive and ambitious housing plan this country has ever seen, because we know that making sure that young people can afford a home, making sure we change the way homes are built in this country, is about building a stronger future for everyone in this country. That's what fairness for every generation looks like. That's what this government is focused on, while they're focused on cuts.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, we will cut the rent. When I was Minister of Housing, we paid half as much for rent in Canada that we pay today. And on that question of his ambitious housing plan, I decided to read all about it in their 2015 platform. They said, "We will make it easier for Canadians to find an affordable place to call home." That was 9 years ago. They doubled the cost since that promise was made, and then they repeated the promise yesterday. Why do we expect the same promise with the same programs and the same Prime Minister to be kept this time?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I was in Vancouver a few weeks ago to speak with young people about the fact that we're supporting renters with greater protections and making sure that the money they spend every month on rent actually gets counted in their credit score so they can help get a mortgage on into the future. Our housing plan will unlock 3.87 million new homes by cutting red tape, by reforming zoning, by lowering costs of home building, by using public lands and vacant government offices for housing. We're making it easier to save up for a tax-free for a down payment. We're helping end chronic homelessness and make homes more affordable. We're going to continue doing it.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Oh, he's going to turn public buildings and land into housing. Wonder where we got that idea. Actually, it was, let me quote, "We will conduct an inventory of all federal lands and buildings that could be repurposed and make some of these lands available at low cost for affordable housing." That is from his 2015 budget. And now, 9 years later, he can only point to 13 homes on those public lands. And yesterday, he promised a rapid review of all the federal land portfolios. Rapid review. How rapid? Another 9 years?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we made a choice. We made a choice to invest in Canadians, and that started when we took office because the previous government had not invested in Canadians, continued to choose cuts to services, continued to choose austerity over the kinds of investments that a confident country should be making in its citizens. And that's where we have stepped up, and that's where we are stepping up right now to make sure that young people have the opportunities to build a strong future themselves by asking the wealthiest 0.1% to pay more in taxes. Unfortunately, the Leader of the Opposition continues to stand with the ultra-wealthy while we stand with...
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Named immigration for housing costs and the immigration minister who caused it all. Then he made that minister responsible for housing. Since that time, that minister has a $4 billion housing accelerator that he admits will not build any homes, no specific homes. And in fact, since it began, housing starts have gone down this year, and his housing agency says they'll go down next year and the year after that. How is it the Prime Minister can spend $4 billion on a housing accelerator that decelerates home building?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to talk about the housing accelerator because it stands in direct contrast with any plan that the Leader of the Opposition has put forward to pick fights with municipalities and provinces on housing. We're actually stepping up with investments that are allowing for more densification, for 4 units as of right, to make sure there's better use of public lands, including by municipalities and provinces, by making sure we're changing the math around building affordable homes to unlock millions of homes over the coming years. This is the work that we're doing right across the country with people who are ambitious about solving the housing crisis. If the Leader of the Opposition doesn't want to help solve it, he needs to keep getting out of the way.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, it was solved when rent was $973 a month, Mr. Speaker, until he came along. But more proof that he is not worth the cost after 9 years. He's blaming the whole world. If the world is to blame for the housing problems in Canada, then why is it that housing here is 50 to 75% more expensive than in the United States? Why is it that housing costs have risen faster than in any other G7 country relative to incomes? Why is it that we have the fewest homes per capita despite having the most land and the most lumber? Why? Is it him?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite well knows that Canada's population is growing faster than our fellow countries around the world, and that is a good thing. It is a good thing that we continue to draw in people to be successful in this country. It is also extremely important that we recognize that even as the world is faced with challenges around inflation, disrupted supply chains, getting over the pandemic, conflicts and shifting geopolitics, Canada is actually on solider footing fiscally than any of our other G7 partners, with a lower debt to GDP ratio, a lower deficit, and a continued focus on creating the jobs and the future that Canadians need.
The Honourable Member for Bill. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Says that this is all about fairness. Well, we'll take him at his word and read the story of Emily, who told the Toronto Star that she could afford a home in 2015 with a mortgage $2,000. But after this Prime Minister's inflationary deficits ballooned mortgage rates, she lost her home, and now she rents a small apartment for $4,000 a month. So small, she says she can smell her own neighbors. Has the Prime Minister been fair to Emily?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our economy can't succeed unless young people are successful, and that's why the focus in this budget is on fairness for every generation, which is why we are asking the wealthiest 0.1% to pay more in taxes to be able to support families like Emily's and others across the country that have lost the dream of home ownership because of the way the global economy is going, because of pressures that they're living. This is why we're continuing to step up. But what we don't see is why the Conservative leader continues to stand with the ultra-wealthy, continues to block attempts to invest in dental care for low-income people.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, that was exactly the promise he made 9 years ago. He said that Emily wouldn't have to pay any more, that some rich guy would pay. But since then, his trust fund hasn't paid any more taxes. The billionaires that host him on private islands, they don't pay any more taxes. They hide their money abroad. But Emily is paying. She's paying $4,000 a month for an apartment that is so small, she says she smells her neighbors. Is the Prime Minister treating Emily fairly?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative solution for Emily is for governments to do less to support her, to do less to invest in childcare that she may or may not need for her kids, the support for her parents or grandparents who can go to the dentist now because of a Canada Dental program that the Conservatives have blocked, the investments that are going to actually support building more infrastructure in her community, whether it's public transit and, quite frankly, the investments that are going to ensure more apartment buildings, more affordable rentals, more affordable homes are being built. He wants to do less for Emily. We're doing more.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, in 2015, Emily had a home with a mortgage payment of $2,000. Now, she has an apartment with a rental payment of $4,000. How can he possibly suggest that she's better off paying twice as much to rent a place than she was under Conservatives owning one?
Hear, hear, hear. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, how can the leader of the Conservative Party actually believe that doing less to invest in Emily's future is of help to her? He is standing here continuing to push for austerity and cuts to programs and cuts to the kinds of supports that, yes, Canadians need more than ever before because the world is a much more challenging place. That is why we're continuing to step up. That's why we're asking the wealthiest 0.1% to pay a little more, something that he is standing against, that he will be voting against because he's still in the pockets of the ultra-wealthy instead of focusing on Canadians who need it.
The Opposition.
And after 9 years and much spent, not a single meal served. What he has served up is a tax on the food of the very children he claims to want to help. A tax that will cost every single middle-class family more than they get back in rebates, according to a scientific study by the Parliamentary Budget Officer. A tax he increased by 23%. If he really wants to stop the hunger for 1 in 4 kids in schools today, will he axe the tax?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, just this past Monday, millions of Canadians received the Canada Carbon Rebate in their bank accounts. That puts more money in the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadian families across the jurisdictions in which it applies, according to the Parliamentary Budget Officer. 8 out of 10 families, which is middle class and lower income families. But the Leader of the Opposition chooses to stand once again with the wealthiest families, the ones with big indoor swimming pools and 9 big cars. Those are the things they're choosing to stand with because we're putting more money back in the pockets of Canadians.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister thinks anyone who puts gas in their car is rich and needs to be made poor. He thinks any single mother who's not already pouring water in her children's milk is too rich, and he wants to make her poorer. He thinks that families that are heating their homes in big cold Canada are too rich, and he wants to make them poor. A little bit rich, coming from the guy who stuffed his family fortune in a tax-sheltered trust fund and helps his billionaire island friends avoid paying their bills. So why doesn't he stop taking from the have-nots to give to the have-yachts?
Hear, hear. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in this budget, we're proposing to ask the ultra-wealthy to pay more in taxes to support lower-income Canadians and middle-class Canadians, something that the Conservatives are standing against, Mr. Speaker. They choose to stand with the ultra-wealthy while we continue to invest in supports for families. We've cut the child poverty rate in half since 2016. We've continued to move forward on investing in supports for families right across the country. And with this budget focused on fairness for every generation, we're continuing to do exactly that, despite the opposition of the Conservatives.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Not the opposition of the Conservatives he needs to worry about. It's the Liberal Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador. Quote, on the carbon tax in particular, the Prime Minister has tried to bait me at times with certain ad hominems and name-calling almost. But look, we have a very different opinion on the carbon tax. I wish the Prime Minister would understand that. He's being very sclerotic in his approach and on this ideological marriage that he has to this carbon tax. Mr. Speaker, will he end his ideological marriage with the carbon tax so that Canadians can eat, heat, and house themselves?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I am resolute that I will fight climate change and put more money back in the pockets of Canadians right across the country. Any premier is welcome to come forward with a plan to put a price on pollution that meets the levels required by the federal government instead of complaining. But that is what we will continue to do. We will ensure that a price on pollution that puts more money back in the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadians, including in Newfoundland and Labrador, continues to be in place right across the country, because that's what Canadians need for a stronger future and for affordability.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, the Parliamentary Budget Officer confirms, in fact, that 6 out of 10 Canadians pay more in carbon tax than they get back in rebates. 100% of middle class or middle quintile Canadians pay more in tax than they get back, with it being especially bad for rural and suburban Canadians. And now we have 2-year highs in gas prices all across Ontario. Ontarians punished because of a 23% carbon tax. They can thank him every time they fill up the tank. Why won't he axe the tax so that Ontarians can afford to drive to work?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Ontario is an excellent example of a jurisdiction that chose to move forward with its own cap-and-trade system so they would not be subject to the federal carbon pricing backstop. But it was the choice of a Conservative premier to scrap the carbon pricing system that they had that took on the federal carbon pricing backstop. But that's not all bad, Mr. Speaker, because that actually puts more money in the pockets of 8 out of 10 Ontarian families, which is something that the Parliamentary Budget Officer has confirmed repeatedly. Mr. Speaker, we're fighting climate change and putting more money back in people's pockets.
With his only goal being to save his electoral skin. I want to say very clearly that I am denouncing this government and budget as a representative of Quebecers.
Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, austerity is what people are living every day when they can't afford to eat, heat, or house themselves after 9 years of this Prime Minister. But when they pay the GST, they assume that they're getting something in return. It turns out that they pay $54.1 billion in GST. And it costs them $54.1 billion in interest on the national debt. Does the Prime Minister realize that not 1 penny from the money Canadians pay in GST goes to valuable services? It all goes to pay wealthy bankers.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, In the face of the challenges Canadians are struggling with every single day, the solution by the Conservatives is for government to do less, to invest less in supporting Canadians, less for seniors and dental care, yes, less for child care spaces, less to invest in medical supports and in health care, less to invest in building more homes. The solution proposed by the Conservatives is for government to do less for Canadians. We are continuing to invest in people responsibly with the best, lowest debt to GDP in the G7. We will continue.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Less for bankers and bondholders, Mr. Speaker. More for doctors and nurses. This year, for the first time in over a generation, the federal government will spend more on interest for the national debt than we do on health care, after he doubled the size of the debt and grew health spending slower than the previous Conservative government. Why is it that he wants to give $54 billion hard-earned Canadian tax dollars to wealthy bankers and bondholders and not doctors and nurses?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, that would perhaps be a more credible partisan argument if it wasn't for the fact that the Conservative Party consistently stood against investments to support Canadians. The dental care program we're putting forward that's going to help already the 1.7 million seniors who've signed up, the Conservatives have not only voted against, but are busy spreading misinformation around the country to try and scare people out of that program for partisan gains. The fact is, we're going to continue to invest in child care spaces because that helps families. We're going to continue to invest in in supporting students so they have less debts. We're going to build more homes. They want
The Honour.
Mr. Speaker, David Dodge, proud Liberal and former Liberal appointee as Governor of the Central Bank, said that this would be the worst budget in over 40 years. It turned out he was right. We've had John Manley, who said the Prime Minister is pushing on the inflationary gas pedal, Manley being a former Liberal finance minister. Now we even have Bill Morneau condemning the government of which he was the former finance minister. Mr. Speaker, why is it that so many Liberals have come to the conclusion that this Prime Minister is not worth the cost?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, there are people like the Conservative Party of Canada that are going to choose to stand with the ultra-wealthy and not stand with young people who need better supports as we ensure more housing, more investments, more opportunities for them to succeed in an economy that is increasingly tilted towards the ultra-wealthy, away from young people and the middle class. That's why we're going to continue to step up and put money in the pockets of Canadians who need it by asking the wealthiest to pay a little bit more, something the Conservatives will continue to stand against because they stand with the ultra-wealthy.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, all the adults in the Liberal and NDP parties are saying that this budget is irresponsible. Yeah. We have John Manley, former Liberal finance minister, saying this Prime Minister is pushing on the inflationary gas pedal. David Dodge, renowned Liberal, is saying it could be the worst budget in 4 decades. Bill Morneau, remember him? And before he became Bill No More, he said that this is a troubling budget, and even Tom Mulcair says that there's too much going to debt interest. Isn't this like the NDP Liberal marriage? The parents went away and the rambunctious, restless kids went and trashed the place?
Prime Minister.
Speaker, while the Leader of the Opposition continues to focus on partisan attacks, we're going to stay focused on building a better future for Canadians. Speaking of inflation, Mr. Speaker, this is the 3rd month in a row in which inflation has been within the Bank of Canada's target range. That is because we continue to govern responsibly in a fiscally sound way that is at the forefront of the G7, even as we step up to invest in Canadians and in their future. Confident countries invest in themselves and their people, Mr. Speaker. That is what we are doing, while the Conservatives propose to do less, to invest less, to support Canadians.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Speaker, it's not me that's doing personal or partisan attacks against this Prime Minister's agenda. It's his fellow Liberals and New Democrats. It's his coalition partner who simultaneously attacks everything he does and then enthusiastically stands up to support it. It's the Prime Minister who attacks his immigration minister for letting the system get completely out of control and then attacks himself for doubling housing costs, making life so unfair. If they're so busy attacking themselves and their own record, why don't they just call a carbon tax election so Canadians can vote them out?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker.
Excuse me. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this government is making the choice to invest in a fairer future for all Canadians, for every generation. That is the choice we're making. Now, the Conservatives are continuing to choose to stand with the wealthiest in this country, choose to do less to invest in childcare, less to invest in solving the housing crisis, less to support young people across the country who need to feel the opportunities they can build in the future again. We will continue to be there to put money in the pockets of Canadians, to put homes in their communities, to build a stronger future for them and their families, while the Conservatives continue to promote cuts and austerity.
That's right.
The Honourable Member from Calgary Skyview.